Hello, first graders. We are back to read the next installment in the A to Z Mystery Series. We are, of course, on to the letter U, which is the Unwilling Umpire. And I bet a lot of you know what an umpire is. An umpire is part of a baseball team. So you can see they're watching a baseball game. So fun. Chapter 1. Crack! The baseball popped into the warm June air and rose slowly toward the sky. The crowd leaped to its feet, yelling, "Run! Run!" Mr. Dillon, the school principal, dropped the bat and raced toward first base. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose were sitting in the front row of the bleacher seats. Dink's full name was Donald David Duncan, but his friends called him Dink. Having a baseball game to raise money was a great idea, Ruth Rose said. Yeah, said Josh. We have fun raising funds. The kids in Greenlawn had sold enough tickets to fill the bleachers at the town baseball field. The money would go to Camp Challenge, a summer camp for kids with special needs. Out in center field, Josh's mom watched the baseball as it started to fall. She raised her glove and the ball dropped neatly into it. Mr. Dillon was out. He trotted back toward home plate. I didn't know my mom could catch like that, Josh said. Dink grinned at Josh. Too bad she couldn't teach you how, he said, giving Josh an elbow in the side. Great catch, Mom, Josh yelled. Gentlemen, you're out, yelled Pete Unkenholtz, the umpire at home plate, motioning with his thumb. Ladies, you're up. Pete was a tall, friendly guy with spiky blonde hair. He was a good worker, too. He had helped set up the bleachers for the game. Josh's mom's catch was the third out for the men's team. The women ran off the field high-fiving each other. The men began to take their positions on the field, joking with the female players. Josh turned to Ruth Rose. Want to make a bet? The men beat the women? He asked. Ruth Rose nodded, making her black curly hair bounce. She liked to dress in all one color. Today she wore red from her headband down to her high-top sneakers. Sure, I'll bet you an ice cream cone that the women win, Ruth Rose said to Josh. Josh flashed a grin. You're on, he said, shaking Ruth Rose's hand. All three kids watched the men take their positions. Their friend, Mr. Thaddeus Pocket, was head coach. He walked toward the field, chatting with the players. How did Mr. Pocket learn so much about baseball, he asked. He told me he played a lot in college, Josh said. It was great of him to bring some of the baseballs from his collection to the game today, Ruth Rose said. Yeah, I guess they're worth a lot of money, Dink added. He let me hold the one signed by Babe Ruth. Cool, I'm named after a famous baseball player, Ruth Rose said. Ha, Josh said. I think they named a candy bar after him, too. 6 of Mr. Pocket's autographed baseballs were on display in the clubhouse. Everyone who bought a ticket to the game had a chance to admire them in the locked case. The men were all in their field positions. Ellie was up first with the women's team. She grabbed a bat and headed for the batter's box. Pete smiled at Ellie and gave her a thumbs up. Pete seems like a nice guy, Dink said. I'm glad he volunteered to ump. Where did he come from? Josh asked. He just showed up a couple of weeks ago, right? Dink shrugged. I don't know, but everyone seems to like him a lot. He sure is big, Ruth Rose observed. Look how he towers over Ellie. Pete threw the ball to the men's pitcher, Mr. Linkletter. The scoreboard read men 1, women 0. Play ball, Pete yelled. Ellie stepped up to the batter's box. Everyone cheered as she got ready for the first pitch from Mr. Linkletter. Behind Ellie, Jake, a local firefighter, was catching. He crouched with his mitt in front of his chin. The pitch was low, but Ellie swung anyway. She missed, and the ball zinged into Jake's waiting glove. Strike one, Pete announced as Jake tossed the ball to the pitcher. Mr. Linkletter wound up and threw his next pitch. This one was high, but Ellie swung and caught part of the ball. It skipped down the first baseline. Lucky O'Leary fielded the ball in foul territory and whipped it back to Mr. Linkletter. Strike two. The spectators jumped to their feet for the third pitch. Everyone was yelling, whistling, or clapping. Pete raised his arms for quiet. Mr. Linkletter's third pitch was right in the strike zone. Ellie swung with all her might. Crack! The ball soared over Mr. Linkletter's head, dropped and rolled between Officer Fallon's legs in center field. Ellie took off. By the time Officer Fallon ran down the ball and snapped it for Lucky O'Leary at first, Ellie was rounding second base. Lucky threw to Doc Henry at third, but Lucky's throw was wide. When Doc lunged for the ball, Ellie made third base and kept running. With her legs pumping and arms swinging, she thundered across home plate. Safe, shouted Pete, throwing his arms wide. Everyone leaped into the air and yelled. Ellie had scored the first run for the women. The scoreboard now read men 1, women 1. It's a tie, 1-1. The corner picture is a baseball mitt. Very nice. Here's the next, not a chapter picture yet, but here's the next picture. So here are the three kids. And here's Pete Unkenholtz, the umpire. Matches the guy on the cover. Chapter 2. It's a tie, Ruth Rose said. I can taste that ice cream cone, Josh. Boy, the men are lousy fielders, Josh grumbled. My grandmother can catch better. Just then, Pete Unkenholt started sneezing. He wiped his eyes, sneezed again, and then turned to say something to the catcher. After a few seconds, Pete headed toward the clubhouse. As Pete passed Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose, he stopped for a second. Darn allergies, the young man said. His eyes were red, and he was taking deep breaths. Pete trudged toward the clubhouse. The kids watched Mr. Pocket walk over to home plate. What's going on? They heard him ask the catcher. He went to get his allergy medicine, Jake told Mr. Pocket. Mr. Pocket made an announcement over the public address system. The crowd relaxed and waited for the game to continue. But when Pete hadn't returned after 5 minutes, people began to wonder what was going on. I'm going to use the boys' room, Josh said. Be right back. Josh jogged to the clubhouse while the crowd waited for Pete to return. Suddenly, Josh came racing back to the bleachers. He slid in next to Dink out of breath. What's up? Ruth Rose asked. You're not going to believe this, Josh whispered to his friends. Mr. Pocket's autographed baseballs. They're gone. Ruth Rose looked toward the clubhouse. Maybe Mr. Pocket moved them someplace else when the game started, she said. Josh was shaking his head. No, the glass case is smashed in a million pieces, he said. Someone stole those balls. Dink and Ruth Rose stared at Josh open-mouthed. Should we tell Mr. Pocket? Ruth Rose asked after a few seconds. We have to, Dink said. He'll go bonkers, Josh predicted. The three kids walked over to Mr. Pocket. Dink swallowed, then tugged on the man's arm. Hi there, Mr. Pocket said. Where's that ump? These people want some baseball action. Did you do anything with those 6 baseballs? Dink asked. Why, of course, Mr. Pocket said. You saw me lock them in the case. You didn't move them anywhere else? Ruth Rose asked. Mr. Pocket's smile vanished. What's going on, kids? Has something happened to my baseballs? They're gone, Josh said. The case is smashed. There's glass all over the floor. Mr. Pocket turned and marched toward the clubhouse. The 3 kids watched him go. You didn't happen to see Pete when you went inside, did you? Ruth Rose asked Josh. Nope. The first thing I saw when I got inside was all the glass, Josh said. I was the only one in the place. Gosh, Dink said. Do you think Pete stole Mr. Pocket's baseballs? They already have a crime and a suspect. It's looking like Pete might have taken the baseballs. And there's the chapter picture. Chapter 3. Officer Fallon left his position on the field and walked over to the kids. What's going on? He said. Where's your umpire? We don't know, Josh said, but Mr. Pocket's baseball collection is missing. Officer Fallon blinked. What do you mean, missing? He asked. Josh told Officer Fallon what he discovered. Did you see anyone else inside the clubhouse? The police chief asked. Josh shook his head. I was the only one there, he said. Officer Fallon looked toward the clubhouse. Pete went inside just before you did, Josh, Officer Fallon said. Are you telling me he wasn't in there? Josh shook his head. I didn't see anyone. After I noticed the baseballs were gone, I got the heck out of there, he said. Mr. Pocket stormed up to them. His face was as white as his hair. They are gone, he said. Thaddeus Pocket, just how much are those balls worth? Officer Fallon asked. A great deal, Mr. Pocket said, but I don't care about the money. My father gave me those baseballs. I'll do my best to get them back for you, Officer Fallon said. He ran toward the parking lot where he'd parked his cruiser. Mr. Pocket sighed. Well, I guess the game is over, he said. He walked away. A minute later, the kids heard his voice over the public address system. Ladies and gents, I'm sorry to report that the game has been called off. There was a pause. Then he continued. We hope the game will be continued in a few days. We'll let you know as soon as we know more. Thank you. The kids watched Mr. Pocket walk toward Main Street. The people in the bleachers began leaving. Dink could hear them disappointed voices as they passed. The men straggled off the field looking confused. Ellie walked over to the kids. What's all this about? She asked. And what's with Mr. Pocket? After he talked with you kids, he looked like he swallowed some nails. Josh explained. And Pete disappeared the same time those baseballs did, Ruth Rose added. You're kidding, right? Ellie said. Nope, Officer Fallon just took off, Josh said. I think he's going to find Pete. Ellie looked sad. Gee, he seemed like such a nice guy, she said. I thought so too, Dink said. Do you know where he came from? Ruth Rose asked Ellie. I mean, we don't really know anything about him. All I know is what he told me a couple days ago, said Ellie. He came into the diner for a coffee and we chatted. He said he was headed down south, but he stopped to earn some more money. He's got a trailer parked at the river campground. But where did he come from? Asked Dink. Ellie shrugged. Didn't say, but I find it hard to believe that he's a thief. You know what's weird? Josh said. If Pete planned to steal the balls, why'd he do it during the game? Maybe he figured no one would be in the clubhouse, Ruth Rose said. I guess he was right. It seems awfully strange, Ellie said. Well, if the game is off, I better get back to my diner. Ellie hurried away, and the kids walked slowly toward Main Street. A lot of people stopped them to ask what was going on. The kids explained, and the people went away, shaking their heads. Just as the kids reached Main Street, Officer Fallon's cruiser appeared. In the back seat, staring straight ahead, sat Pete Unkenholtz. This is a very different one because they already have a suspect in custody. That was fast. We're only on chapter 3. That was chapter 3. Now we're on chapter 4. Did you see that? Dink asked. Officer Fallon arrested Pete. Let's go see what's going on, suggested Josh. Do you think they'll put him in jail? The kids hurried up West Green Street. Just as they passed the elderly housing apartment, they saw Officer Keene pulling up in a black truck. He parked in front of the police station and stepped out. "That's Pete's truck," whispered Josh. "Hello, Officer Keene," Dink said. "What's going on? Is Pete under arrest?" Officer Keene nodded. "We caught him in his truck. Pete admitted he took those baseballs," he said. "Did you get them back, Officer Keene?" Ruth Rose asked. "Nope. Pete told us he'd stole them but wouldn't say what he did with them," Officer Keene said. He hurried into the police station. The kid sat on the front steps. "Gee, what a mess," Josh said. "Poor Mr. Pocket finds an umpire who ends up stealing his baseballs." "Guys, something's not right about this," Dink said. "Why would Pete confess to stealing the baseballs then not tell him what he did with them? I mean, why not just lie and said he didn't steal them?" "Something else doesn't make sense," Ruth Rose added. "Why would Pete steal the balls when hundreds of people watched him go in the clubhouse for his allergy medicine? Everyone would know he was the thief." Dink shook his head. "I don't know. It's hard to believe a guy who helped us set up the bleachers would turn around and steal from us," he said. "Then why did he say he stole those baseballs?" Josh asked. Dink stood up. "I wish we could talk to Pete," he said. "Maybe he saw someone else in the clubhouse. Gosh, he might have even seen someone take the baseballs. And maybe that's why he's not talking," Ruth Rose added. "The crook must be someone he knows." "Pete Unkenholtz just got to Greenlawn," Josh said. "He doesn't know anyone here." After a minute, Ruth Rose said, "No one knows him here either. Pete could be a bank robber for all we know." "I wish we knew more about him," Dink said. "I just thought of something," Ruth Rose cried. If we do an internet search, we might learn something about Pete." "That's a good idea," Miss Dink said. "Let's go talk to Mrs. McElroy." They crossed the street and walked into the library. The librarian, Mrs. McElroy, was sitting at her computer. "Hi, kids," she said. "What a disappointment that game was canceled." The kids told her about Pete's arrest. "What?" she said. "He certainly doesn't seem like the type to steal." "Officer Keene said Pete confessed," Josh told her. Mrs. McElroy shook her head. "My goodness," she said. "Well, how can I help you kids today?" "We think there's something fishy going on," Dink said. "It just doesn't make sense that Pete would steal those balls during the game. We want to search on the internet to see if we can find out more about him," Ruth Rose said. "I'm not sure what kind of information we'd get," Mrs. McElroy said, "but let's give a quick search. I was just on YouBuy. My husband's birthday is coming up, and I decided to shop online." She closed out a YouBuy and opened up a search engine. "Do you know Pete's last name?" she asked. "It's Unkenholtz," Dink said, and spelled it for her as she typed. A window opened on her monitor. They're telling me no Pete or Peter Unkenholtz was found." "Why don't you try just the last name?" Ruth Rose suggested. "Good idea, hun," Mrs. McElroy said, typing in just Unkenholtz. This time she got results. There was a link to a website for the Coast Press newspaper in Penobscot, Maine. The kids leaned closer to the monitor and read. "Maine, December 10th, reported by Susan Green. Bakery van stolen. Marion Unkenholtz admitted taking a local baker's delivery van for a joyride. The van's owner, Honored Sugar, decided not to press charges." So someone named Unkenholtz has already been in trouble for stealing a bakery van. That's interesting. And it does, or that's the end of the chapter. And it does seem weird that he would confess to stealing the baseballs right away, but then not tell him where they were. And why would he do it during a game when everybody could see him? Seems very odd. Chapter 5. "Who's Marion Unkenholtz?" asked Josh. "I wonder if she's related to Pete," Dink said. "I think Marion is a man's name," Mrs. McElroy said. "The female Marion has an A instead of an O." Ruth Rose glanced at the monitor again. "The reporter who wrote the story is Susan Green. Maybe she knows this Marion Unkenholtz. Could we call her?" Mrs. McElroy picked up the phone and dialed information. She asked for the Coast Press in Penobscot, Maine, wrote down the number, and handed the phone to Ruth Rose. Ruth Rose punched in the number, then listened. A second later, she asked to speak to Susan Green. After a pause, she said, "Well, is anyone else there who can tell me anything about Marion Unkenholtz? Your paper reported that he stole a van." Ruth Rose waited and then listened to someone else. "It is?" she said. "Oh, well, thank you." I wonder what she found out. Ruth Rose handed the phone back to Mrs. McElroy. "Susan Green moved to California," she said, "but I spoke with another reporter. He remembered the stolen van because his sister works in Sugar's Bakery." "Did you find out if Pete is related to Marion?" Josh asked. Ruth Rose nodded. "Pete is Marion," she said. "Huh?" asked Josh. "The reporter said the thief's full name is Marion Peter Unkenholtz," Ruth Rose said. "I guess he goes by Pete." Dink just blinked at the news. He felt numb. "Could it be a different Pete Unkenholtz?" he asked. Josh grinned. "Yeah, like there are a bunch of Unkenholtzes running around in that place in Maine." "I'm sorry you had to get this bad news," Mrs. McElroy said. She took a purse from a drawer. "You're welcome to stay, but I have to get some lunch now." "Us too," Josh said. He looked at Dink and Ruth Rose. "Okay," Dink said. "I don't know what else we can do." "Well, I have an idea," Ruth Rose said. The kids thanked Mrs. McElroy and left the library. "Does your idea have anything to do with lunch?" Josh asked Ruth Rose. "I'm so hungry I could eat a spider." Ruth Rose headed down West Green Street. Dink and Josh shrugged, then followed her across Main Street. "Where are we going?" Dink asked. "To the river," Ruth Rose said, heading to the empty baseball field. "I want to check out Pete's trailer." "Why?" asked Josh. "Because I don't believe Pete is the kind of person who would take someone's van for a joyride," Ruth Rose said. But you just told us that reporter said Pete did it, Josh said. Ruth Rose shook her head. I just have a feeling there has to be some other explanation, she said. I guess I agree, Dink said. It almost seems like Pete is two different people. The kids followed a sunny path toward the river. In a clearing, they saw picnic tables and fireplaces. Only one campsite was occupied. Under a tree was a small white trailer, the kind you would pull behind a car or truck. A few yards away, the Indian River sparkled in the sunlight. Cool trailer, Josh whispered. It would be fun to sleep here. You could fish from your bed. 3 aluminum steps led up to a door. Under a window was a lawn chair. A red and blue flannel shirt was draped over its back. The spot was quiet except for bird calls and squirrels scampering in the leaves. So there's the campsite where Pete must be staying. Josh picked up the shirt, then put it back on the chair. How do we know if this is Pete's trailer, he asked. Dink walked around the trailer. I think it is, he said. Look at this. Josh and Ruth Rose followed him. Dink pointed to the license plate. It was from Maine. Josh walked up the steps and rapped on the door. Anybody home? He called. When no one answered, he tried the doorknob. Locked, he said. Dink stood on the lawn chair and tried to look through the window next to the door. There's a curtain, he said. Ruth Rose walked over to the picnic table. There was a trash barrel and a small stone fireplace with a grill for cooking. A long-handled fork was nestled on the edge of the fireplace. Ruth Rose picked up the fork and poked at the stuff in the trash barrel. Hungry? Josh cracked, walking toward her with Dink. Ruth Rose stuck a fork into a small box and pulled out the barrel. On the side of the box was a picture of a man sneezing. Below the picture were the words, Allergreen, fast relief from grass allergies. We know that Pete has allergies, so this must be Pete's trailer. Chapter 6. Pete wasn't faking his allergies, Dink said. So he was going into the clubhouse for his medicine, Josh said. We have to show this to Officer Fallon, Ruth Rose said, shoving the box into her pocket. The kids ran almost all the way to the police station. They hurried up the front steps and down the cool hallway and knocked on Officer Fallon's door. Come in, he said. When the kids entered, Officer Fallon was just hanging up the phone. Hey kids, the police chief said. Looks like you've been running. Have a seat and catch your breath. Ruth Rose put the Allergreen box on his desk, and the kids sat down. We found that at the campsite, she said. This proves Pete really does have allergies. Officer Fallon held up a large hand. Whoa, slow down, he said, smiling at Ruth Rose. What campsite? We found out Pete is living in the trailer at the campground, Dink explained. So we went there, and Ruth Rose found this box in the trash. Officer Fallon picked up the box. As he read the print, the kids explained about how they'd found the article about Pete on the internet. We found out Josh stopped and looked guilty. What, Josh? Officer Fallon said. What were you going to say? Well, we found out that Pete stole a van, Josh said. Officer Fallon set the medicine box on his desk. Anything else? He asked. His first name is really Marion, Ruth Rose went on, and he comes from Maine. I called the newspaper and a reporter told me his middle name is Peter. Officer Fallon rubbed his chin. You've been busy, he said. We don't think Pete stole anything, Ruth Rose said. We think he went inside to get his medicine, not to steal Mr. Pocket's baseballs, Dink added. Or maybe the medicine made a good excuse to go to the clubhouse, Officer Fallon said. Remember, Pete confessed to taking the balls. Officer Fallon stood up and walked over to his office window. Why would he confess something he didn't do? He asked over his shoulder. He might have seen another person in the clubhouse, Josh volunteered. Maybe he's protecting someone. Maybe. All I know is Pete is unwilling to talk to me, Officer Fallon said. He's shut up like a clam. How long will Pete have to stay in jail? Ruth Rose asked. The chief sighed and slumped into his chair. I'm afraid Pete could go to prison for a very long time, he said. No one said anything for a minute. What if we found the baseballs? Dink said. If Mr. Pocket got them back, could Pete get out of jail? A judge would have to decide that, Officer Fallon said. There'll be a trial. I've been trying to get a lawyer for Pete. Did you find one? Dink asked. Yes, Officer Fallon said. He tapped the pencil against the Allergreen box. But when I asked Pete, he said he wouldn't speak to her. That's the end of that chapter, too. So why would he not want to speak to a lawyer? And why would he confess to something that he didn't do? Very strange book, this one. Let's read one more chapter in this video. Chapter 7. But why not? Josh asked. Officer Fallon shook his head. I wish I knew, he said. If anyone ever needed a good lawyer, Pete does. Could we visit Pete? Dink asked. We could try to convince him to talk to the lawyer. Officer Fallon gazed at Dink across his desk. We have nothing to lose, he said finally. I'll take you 3 to his cell for a few minutes. Explain to Pete that he needs a lawyer. The kids followed Officer Fallon out of his office, along a hallway, and down a set of stairs. At the bottom, Officer Fallon opened a steel door. Behind the door was a large windowless room. In one corner, iron bars formed a small cell. Inside the cell, Pete Unkenholt sat in his chair, staring at his feet. He looks... Oh, I'll show you this page first. But Pete looks very sad. I brought you some company, Officer Fallon said. He nodded at the kids and left the room. Pete looked up. He licked his lips but didn't say anything. He looked scared. "How are you?" Ruth Rose asked. Pete shrugged. "Fine," he said in a soft voice. "Do you have your allergy medication?" Dink asked. Pete nodded, his head toward a box of Allergreen that stood on a small table. Officer Fallon really wants to help you," Josh said. He found you a good lawyer. Will you talk to her?" Pete licked his lips again. "Look, I appreciate your coming, but I already told them I took the balls," he said. "But you need a lawyer," Ruth Rose said. "And we don't think you took those baseballs, even if you said you did." Pete's eyes widened, but he didn't say anything. "When you went to the clubhouse for your medicine, did you see anyone else there?" Josh asked. Pete shook his head. "I stole the baseballs," he muttered. "But why won't you tell Officer Fallon where they are?" Dink asked. "And why won't you talk to the lawyer?" Pete twisted in his chair so his back was to the kids. "Please just go away," he said over his shoulder. After a few seconds, the kids left. They walked back to Officer Fallon's office. "Any luck?" the police chief asked. "He told us to go away," said Josh. "Thanks for trying," Officer Fallon said. "Maybe Pete just needs more time to think." The kids left the police station and headed toward Main Street. "Now I'm really confused," Ruth Rose said. "It's almost like Pete wants to stay in jail." "Something else has been bugging me," Josh said. "If Pete did steal the baseballs, why didn't he just hide them and then come back to the game? By leaving the way he did, he practically pointed the finger at himself." Ruth Rose rubbed her temples. "My brain is tired," she said. "Your brain needs peanut butter," Josh said. "It's a scientific fact that when your brain is stuck, you need something even stickier to get it unstuck. Peanut butter." Dink and Ruth Rose both shoved Josh. But they were hungry, so they followed him to his house on Farm Lane. Josh's mother was in the kitchen, still dressed in shorts and sneakers. She was looking through the window at Josh's younger brothers in the backyard. "You made a great catch today, Mrs. Pinto," Ruth Rose said. Josh's mother smiled at the kids. "It's just luck," she said. "The ball came right to me." "Any news about Mr. Pocket's baseballs?" The kids quickly told her about what they learned about Pete. "Goodness," Josh's mother said. "Pete Unkenholt seems like the most honest person in the world." She headed out of the room. "Will you watch the boys while I shower?" she asked Josh. "Sure, and we're going to make sandwiches, okay?" Josh asked. "Okay, and send your brothers in for their lunch in a few minutes," his mother said as she climbed the stairs. Josh made thick peanut butter sandwiches while Dink and Ruth Rose found the milk in 3 glasses. They ate outside at the picnic table. Josh's twin brothers were playing with his dog, Pal, on the lawn. The 2 4-year-olds were tugging at one end of an old t-shirt. The other end was in Pal's mouth. The boys laughed and yelled. Pal growled and tossed his head back and forth. All 3 were covered with dirt. "Mom's gonna flip out when she sees what you're doing to your shirt," Josh yelled. "It isn't our shirt," Brian yelled back. "It's yours," Bradley chimed in. Both boys burst into giggles and went running after Pal. Dink and Ruth Rose laughed. "Bye-bye shirt," Dink said. "Probably one of my favorites, too," Josh muttered. Then he jumped up and nearly spilled his milk. "Guys, there was a shirt at Pete's trailer," he said, "outside on that chair." The shirt made him think about it. So there's the kids eating their lunch. And there are the twins and Pal ruining Josh's shirt. "We saw the shirt," Ruth Rose said, licking peanut butter off her fingers. "So? I picked it up," Josh went on. "At the time, I didn't think anything about it, but now I realize the shirt is way too small to fit Pete. It must belong to someone else." "Like who?" Dink asked. "I don't know," Josh said, "but if Pete's not talking, maybe we can talk to whoever owns that shirt." "If we can find him," Dink said. "Or her," Ruth Rose added. "Pal might be able to help," Josh said. He whistled and his dog came trotting behind the barn, quickly followed by Brian and Bradley. Pal flopped on the ground and plopped both front paws on top of the wet, filthy t-shirt. "Mom wants you guys inside for lunch." "And you better wash your hands," Josh told Brian and Bradley. "They're gross." They're clean," Bradley said. He and his brother held up 4 dirty hands. Josh leaned toward his little brothers. "Mom's making you a surprise for lunch," he whispered. "Yay!" screamed Brian, heading for the door. "Wait up!" yelled Bradley as he raced after his brother. "Come on," Josh said to Dink and Ruth Rose. He clipped Pal's leash to his collar and tossed the ruined t-shirt onto the picnic table. Then they all hurried toward the campsite. 5 minutes later, they saw the trailer. Pal spotted a squirrel and began barking and tugging on the leash. The squirrel dashed up a tree as the kids approached the trailer. "Nobody's here," Ruth Rose said, glancing around the clearing. "Well, someone has been," Josh said, pointing to the lawn chair. "The shirt is gone." So maybe Pete is not the only one who lives in this trailer. This mystery just keeps getting weirder and weirder. But we're going to leave it there for now. We'll be back another day to finish The Unwilling Umpire. See you then.